Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Jane Hansen. This week in the arena, according to a recent poll conducted by the Pew Research Forum titled Religion Among the Millennials, 92% of Americans believe in God and 80% of us believe in miracles. But with these findings, is there any credible evidence that miracles and so-called divine interventions are actually happening today? Or are they a thing of the past and just hopeful, feel-good stories? Aha! Joining us now is Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our special in-studio guests, Harris Haith, TV and film producer and author of Growing Up Laughing with Eddie Murphy, and Daniel Fazzina, radio host and author of Divine Intervention, Amazing True Stories of God's Miracles Today, Volumes 1 and 2. Welcome to both of you. And both of you have stories of your own particular divine intervention to tell us about. Let's start with you, Harris. I know yours involves a kidney.
Absolutely, absolutely. About 10 years ago, I had kidney failure due to hypertension. Didn't really realize what was going on, the symptoms, headaches, things of that nature. Actually was in the fight game at the time. I used to manage the super middleweight world champion, Steve Little. And we used to work out so much that taking pain relief medicines were always a part of the regimen. So you never really paid attention to, you know, any of the symptoms that you might have. You just thought you were fatigued or whatever. And for me, there were signs of kidney failure. And then one day it actually happened. I actually had a mild stroke and almost died. And was in intensive care for 5 days. And you know, my story is really something because at the same time, my fighter, Steve Little, actually died. He had colon cancer, and he passed away we almost passed away the same day.
Whoa.
He actually did pass away, and I was in intensive care for 5 days, and they wouldn't tell me because my blood pressure was so high that I almost actually stroked out. And so when I got out of intensive care, I found out that he had passed, and his funeral was the day that I actually got out of intensive care, so I wasn't able to make the funeral or anything.
Right, so now you discover that you've got very severe kidney disease.
Right.
And you need a transplant.
Right.
And you're way at the bottom of the list.
Right, right. And then I was in denial. I didn't want to accept the fact that I'd always been healthy and in shape, and I didn't want to accept the fact that I was sick. So I didn't want to take the medications or do what they were telling me, and I prolonged it. I didn't even sign up for the transplant list initially. So I wasted like 2 years just in denial before I actually signed up for the transplant list. And that's
who knocked you on the head and said, buddy, you got to deal with this?
Well, when some of the symptoms that they told me would happen started happening, then I was like, okay, this is serious. Because they tell you initially that you may be able to recover within a year, your kidney might kick back in or what have you. And I was saying, oh, that's me. That's going to happen to me. I'm going to be all right. And, you know, after a while, I realized that it wasn't going to happen, and I went ahead and got on the transplant list.
But then you still didn't think you were going to get a transplant. So tell me what happened that you believe is divine intervention.
Well, at a certain point, I almost died a couple of times. Dialysis is very rough, and that's something you don't wish on your worst enemy. It's a life-sustaining treatment. If you missed a number of treatments in a row, you'll actually die. And so I almost died a couple of times, and you know, during one of the times that I was going through a patch there, I just spoke out to the Lord and I said, Lord, you know what? I've had a great life. I've been on tour with Eddie Murphy, and I've done this, and I had, you know, records on the charts, and a lot of different things happen in my life. And if it's time for me to come home, I'm happy to come home. I have no complaints, but I'd like to live a little bit longer. And I'll do anything if you give me another chance at life. And he said, oh yeah? Just as plain as I'm talking to you. And he said, okay, I have something I want you to do, and it's called Gospel-thon. And so what I do every year is I do a free gospel concert in which we feed everybody for free. There's no offerings being taken. We give everybody Bibles. And it was the hardest initiative. I see why God said, yeah, oh yeah, because nobody wanted to help me with it.
So basically what you got was a message that you need to do something, that there is more for you to do in this world. Absolutely. And you're going to get a kidney.
Absolutely.
So somebody showed up.
Absolutely. And somebody showed up, and I got the call on April Fool's Day. I said, God, you have a sense of humor. I had been called 9 times prior to that because they call the top 3 people on the list, and then it goes according to once they get your blood type, then it's tissue type once you actually get the organ. And so I didn't think I was going to get it again. It was April Fool's Day. I was like, you know, and then they said, you know, come to the hospital. You're going to get the transplant. And at that point, I didn't want to. I had been sick the whole couple of weeks before it, and you're not supposed to actually take the transplant at that point. And I went ahead and I said, God, I'm going to put my hand in your hand, and, you know, if this is meant to be, then, you know, I'm going to come out of it. And I came out of it, and then it was time for me to uphold my
end of the bargain. And here you are. Daniel,
Absolutely.
I know yours involved cancer.
I actually had 2 miraculous miracles that had to do with healing. And the first one happened, it happened to do with my back. When I was 16 years old, I developed back pain from a torn cartilage ring and a bulging disc that was pressing against my nerve. And I went to chiropractic and physical therapy for a number of years, and nothing was really working. I had pain every day, whether I sat or stood for any length of time. And a few years into therapy, I just stopped it all because I figured nothing's working. I just have to live with it the rest of my life. You know, it was mild to moderate. I could bear it though. Fast forward, I discovered the problem in 1991 when I was 16 years old. In 2001, I went on a men's retreat with some guys from my church, all the way out east in Montauk Point, Long Island. And there were a bunch of guys in this hotel meeting room, about 40 guys, and they said, we're going to just dedicate this time to prayer to Jesus for physical healing. So if you have any issues, come to the front of the room, we'll pray for you. So I'm online to go to the front to get prayed for, and my friend is next to me, and he says, Daniel, what are you going to ask for prayer for? And I said, my back, because I've had this problem all these years. And Jane Monsignor, right then, the pain disappeared. I didn't even get to the front of the room yet. No one said anything to me. No one laid hands on me. No one prayed for me.
The pain just disappeared?
It disappeared. I was bending and twisting, and I'm sitting here 10 years later, pain-free.
All right, so then...
Was the cartilage torn then, or was the physical element repaired, or no?
I got a scan several years later, and the doctor said he could still see it on the x-ray, but it just doesn't hurt anymore. So I praise God for that.
Yeah. And then, okay, so you just asked him about that and to see what that was. And then the second thing, though, was the cancer.
Yes. A year later, I had some strange sensations in my chest. I went to get it checked out, and I was in the ER for quite a while, took a bunch of scans. Finally, the doctor came back and he said, well, we found something, and it's a rather large mass in your chest. I'm thinking, like, how large is large? And I asked him, he said, well, it's grapefruit-sized. I'm thinking, oh, that's my favorite fruit, but I don't want that in my chest, you know. He said, you got to have this evaluated immediately. I went to get a biopsy about a week later, and they came back and said it's lymphoma, B-cell lymphoma, it's cancer. He didn't mince words. They said, you know, we'll give you treatment. We're not sure if it's going to respond or not, but if it doesn't, you'll be dead within 3 weeks to 3 months at the most. So it was shocking, really. And to make a long story short, I went through a lot of different therapies. I had chemo. They were going to give me 6 rounds of chemo once a month for 6 months, and they were going to take a scan halfway through to see if the tumor was responding. They were hoping it would be smaller. Throughout that time, I also had intravenous vitamins and minerals. I had chiropractic, acupuncture. A lot of people praying for me, anointing me with oil, saying this thing is born to die. It's going to be a testimony. And I remember, similar to Harris here, I was lying in my bed, in my hospital bed, literally dying one day. This tumor was so big, it was crushing my pulmonary artery. I was actually suffocating to death. And I said, God, you know, I know I'm your child. If you want to take me, I'll go with you. I mean, the Bible says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, and I believe that. But I said, if you want to heal me and let me live, I'll do my best to share with the world your goodness, your grace, your love, and your power. And when they took the scan, the halfway point scan, 3 months in, I remember it was just before Christmas, and I walked out of the radiology place holding the results, and it was completely negative. No more cancer in my body.
Nothing was on the scan?
No more tumor, no more cancer in my body. It was gone.
Wow.
And I've been healed since December of 2002.
That's amazing. All right, I want to take you guys further into what you do now to live up to your end of the bargains that you made, and to talk about talk about other miracles in today. So we're going to take a quick break.
Sure.
But we want to invite you to weigh in on our discussion anytime by going to our website at netny.net and click on Enter the Arena. We welcome your questions and your comments, and we'll be right back. Welcome back as we continue our discussion on miracles and divine intervention. Monsignor, you've just heard these two stories, miraculous as they sound, but what is the Catholic Church's take? I mean, sounds like they made deals with God, and it worked, but what is the Church's take on what is a miracle, what is divine intervention, and how do we measure it?
Well, I think that a lot of times when there's suffering in our life, that focuses us in on our relationship with God, right? So it's not so much of a deal like a quid pro quo, I do this, God does that, but really that one recognizes what's going on in their life. And so you want to kind of make a return to the Lord for the goodness He's done to us. So that's the first thing I would say. From the Catholic perspective, the thing about a miracle is it's instantaneous and inexplicable, right? And so when a saint is being canonized, the miracles that are required, it has to be inexplicable, so that all the science is exhausted, that there was nothing because of a scientific treatment or a natural reason for a cure, but this is something that was simply the hand of God that has intervened in time and space. And I think that is the importance of the miracles for us is our faith is grounded in the miracle, right? Our faith is grounded in the miracle, the resurrection. And so these miracles that we have in our lives, that the Lord bestows blessings upon us, are all pointing to the great miracle of the resurrection.
Right, but I guess what I'm asking is, so everybody, I think most people, when they're faced with a life and death sentence of some sort, will, even if they haven't been as faithful as they could have been, they will turn to some sort of faith. Right. They will say, help me, help me, help me. But what's the difference between where somebody actually gets that help and those that don't?
Well, that's the challenge, right? Because then if it seems like this is a quid pro quo, why does God listen to some and God not listen to others? Typically, the miracle is not maybe what we see as the manifestation of the miracle, right? So that the miracle that is occurring is something else. It's a spiritual healing that takes place in life. So when there is illness, when there's hardship, what that is, that physical manifestation of illness is also a manifestation of a spiritual malady. And so when there's healing, the real miracle is a spiritual relationship that brings us closer to God.
So I'd like to ask each one of you, what is it that you think, why do you think you got a second chance?
Well, I'd just like to touch on the point that you made about, making deals with God. It's not that you make deals with God, because what happens is that it's not instantaneous. It's something that you have to have faith to receive. And you do go through something, no matter what you're going through, you have to still stand on your faith that you're going to receive, and that's how you actually receive. The Bible says that when you pray, believe, and you shall receive it. And so you have to stand on that prayer, no matter what the you still might have the physical circumstances, but you have to stand on that prayer and that your belief in the Lord that He's going to deliver you. And so that, for me, was what I had to go through every day on dialysis. After that initial contact and situation, I still went through days, months, and years before I actually got the kidney. And so I had to stand on my faith to actually receive.
Mm-hmm. And believe. You absolutely had to believe. Absolutely. With every ounce of every intellectual,
Absolutely.
Spiritual, emotional,
Absolutely.
Physical strength that you could.
Absolutely.
So Daniel, for you, how about why you?
Well, people have asked me that question time and time again, and I really believe that it comes down to the will of God and His plan for my life. And I believe everyone has been given a job to do and a purpose on earth. And for some, they ask me, well, why did you get healed and not someone else who prayed also? In God's will, that timing was for them. It was they had a certain amount of time, and at the end of their time, God takes them home. For me, I just made myself available. I said, I didn't know whether I was going to be healed or not. I said, Lord, if you want me to do something, if you want to heal me, I'll just continue to serve you. And He opened up the doors to interview other people, to to get the miracles out, to point ultimately to the resurrection and to Jesus. It's the miracles themselves are not the goal. It's to point people to the God of miracles, and that's what I try to do.
So in this book that you've written about divine intervention, you've talked to, what, 100+ people
yes,
who've had some
between my books and radio show.
What's probably the most dramatic story that you could tell us?
Well, one of my favorites is my friend Charlie Pitts, who he was a soldier in Vietnam, and he was leading a recon mission into the jungles of Vietnam. 6-man team. 5 of the guys jumped out of the C-130, and he was the last guy out. And when he jumped, he pulled the ripcord, and his parachute didn't deploy. Mm-hmm. He pulled the reserve chute, and that one didn't deploy. He had both ripcords in his hands, and he was free-falling, thinking he was dead. But what happened was God intervened. He landed on the open parachute of the soldier below him, and then bounced from that one to the next to the next. He hit all 5 of them in sequence. and then landed in a tree, and all the branches broke his fall. He slid down to the base of the tree and walked away unharmed. And today he is a full-time pastor in Long Island, New York, and serving God. You know, so it's that incident really got him to think about God.
Well, I guess I
Yeah.
would too. And you have George Foreman. You've worked with George Foreman on a movie. Of course, George is the famous fighter and the
Right.
George Foreman Grill, but he had an incidence of divine intervention.
Absolutely. And prior to that, I mean, just want you to know that when I was approached by Roy Foreman, who's George's brother and manager, to actually write, they read my book and they said, you know, we'd like you to do George's story. And I was on dialysis. And so I had to step out on my faith to even take that initiative, because I felt as though at that point I might not even live to see this come to the screen. Yeah. And so it was a leap of faith to even step into it. It's a big project. George has decades of material that we had to review and interviews that had to be done. And I was so graced by Carl King, Don King's son, actually paid for me to fly, you know, here and limousines there and hotels to be able to do George's story. And then in doing George's story, was really taken back by the fact that he had an intervention in which he went to hell and came back from hell, and you know,
he
all
went
of this.
To hell.
Yeah,
that was his experience.
Absolutely, and in
a
locker room after a fight, he was actually.
Oh, because he'd been kind of knocked out, or
well, no, I mean,
he was
actually, that's where God called him. He was actually after a fight, and he was, you know, trying to get, get dressed or whatever, and he went into the shower, and then God just started speaking to him, just started talking to him, and then, you know, he just went into like a trance in which he said he went to hell or whatever, and you know, saw, you know, the bowels of hell, and you know, all of the workings of hell, and came back and was like renewed and was, you know, as a reborn, as you know, we say, and it's really evident. I think George is probably the greatest example of being reborn that we can ever point to, because prior to that, you know, as a fighter, he was the most vicious person in the ring. People don't realize that he was the Mike Tyson of his era. And, you know, now when people see him, people that didn't know him then, you would never think that was the same person. And so it was miraculous transformation.
I guess this experience, this transformation, I mean, it sounds like, I think we all think, if that happened to me, I know, if I got a second chance, I do this and this and this and this and this. But doing this and this and this and this is hard work. And did you ever get to a point where you thought, nah, I'm not going to do that?
Well, no. I mean, for me, I knew that I had some things that I needed to do in order to, my life is all about pleasing the Lord now. And so even with the book, I took 10% of the proceeds from the book and donated it to the transplant center at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital that actually did my transplant. And so, you know, those are the things that I felt that I needed to do. I needed to push forward and serve people more than, because my life has been great. And so I felt like now God has given me an opportunity to serve. And, you know, that's what a minister is. A minister is nothing but a servant. And, you know, that's one of the things that I relish, is a chance to serve now and show people that, you know, I'm really grateful, and show the Lord I'm grateful.
Well, I guess I'd like each one of you to quickly respond to this notion. Do you think that there are more cases of divine intervention or miracles per se now, and we may not see them as clearly? Or are you real exceptions to the rule?
I don't think we're exceptions to the rule. I think it's happening more and more, at least in my circle of friends. God sends me people all the time who have amazing testimonies of healings, deliverances, answered prayers, things that just God intervenes. And my favorite miracle is really a change of heart, like George Foreman's. I actually interviewed him on my radio show, Divine Intervention. He shared the whole story, how he actually died after the fight, you know, and God pulled him out. He was reborn. He quit boxing and became a preacher for 10 years. So, and if you see the footage of him from the 1970s, he was a brooding, angry guy. He actually wanted to physically kill somebody in the ring. That's how, you know, angry he was. So nothing like the guy today.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The transformations are amazing, but
sure.
What do you?
I think that God is always working. I mean, if you take a look at the scriptures, you see, what is Jesus doing? He's always healing.
Absolutely.
He's always healing throughout the scriptures. Absolutely. And he's giving the gift freely, right? Because we know that there are some people who receive the healing and they just go about their business.
Right.
They don't
even
you know,
say thank you.
They don't even say thank you.
Absolutely.
So I think that there are a lot of healings that are taking place, but I think the key component is it's really a question of faith. This is where I think the poverty is in our own country today, is right. There's a real lack of faith, and despite what we might see in terms of manifestations, people claiming about belief in God, there is really a crisis of faith today, because we live in a very rational age, right? Where science is put above everything.
Rational age. You're absolutely right.
And yet, the most important thing that we all
This
are the
stuff
spiritual
happens.
realities. Yeah, that's right.
It's amazing. Daniel and Harris, thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us today. We could talk forever. They won't let us. It was great to meet both of you.
That's my pleasure.
We're going to take a final break, but we'll continue our discussion with a few last thoughts, so we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Continuing our conversation, we're joined once again by Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our regular contributors, Elizabeth Scalia, Managing Editor of the Catholic Portal at Pathos.com, and Grant Galicio, Associate Editor of Commonweal Magazine. All right, you guys, do you believe in miracles?
Oh, I believe in miracles.
I don't know. I want to. As I was listening to the conversation in the previous segments, it put me in mind of this film that I saw last year called Lourdes. It was made in 2009, and it's a very good movie. It's not a documentary. It's a piece of fiction, and it's about a young woman who has MS, and she's confined to a wheelchair, and she goes on these pilgrimages to holy sites. That's kind of her way to get out. She's not necessarily a devout Catholic. But she goes to Lourdes, and she, in the middle of the night, she has this experience of a relief of the symptoms of MS, and she can stand. And the movie is kind of about her response to that, and then the other people who are on pilgrimage with her. And they seem almost to want to believe that this is a miracle more than she does. And at the end of the film, sorry to give it away, but that miracle seems to subside a bit. And I thought, I mean, it's a great movie. I highly recommend it.
You mean the symptoms come back?
There's a suggestion that she's starting to get weaker again. But it raises what I find a very intriguing issue, which is, do miracles have to be permanent? I mean, does a miraculous healing have to last?
Well, ultimately,
in order to be a miracle.
If you're saved sometime, you're still ultimately going to die. But,
sure.
I mean, I don't know. How do you respond to that?
No, of course not. I mean, you can be healed for a time. And I think that is that's fine. I think we all do want miracles. We all want to believe in miracles, and we see the manifestation of miracles around us. I mean, each of us have seen these glimpses of how God has broken into our life, and they're different. The drama is a little different, but God is always moving in your life and in my life. And the challenge for us as really people of faith is to see how He is moving in our life. That's really, I think, what is critical.
Well, you were in Rome for the beatification. Of course, in order to be canonized as a saint, you have to have, what, 2 miracles?
One miracle for the beatification, and then another for the canonization. So.
And so there's the story about the nun with the Parkinson's disease.
Right.
With
and that was actually really very moving to watch her after he had been beatified. During the Mass, they had his relics, his vial of his blood. And this nun, Sister Marie Simone, came, and she was given the honor of processing with that and putting it in the place of honor. And it actually was very moving to look at her and see that she was perfectly healthy, perfectly mobile. You know, and the night before there had been a vigil Mass at the Forum, and she had spoken about the whole experience of her. And she is whole, and she's well, and it's a marvelous thing to see. It was I got goosebumps watching it.
But one of the ways that the Church determines officially, whatever that means, that a miracle has taken place.
It has to be instantaneous.
Well, and it has to last. And I'm just, right? I mean, if she had had a relapse.
I don't know if it has to last, because, as Monsignor said,
it has to be instantaneous. It can't be. It has to be enduring, but that doesn't mean it has to be permanent.
Because there's going to be a point where you're going to be challenged again. So. Right.
I mean, ultimately, if the French sister. If there was a manifestation of her Parkinson's disease in 10 years from now, she would have still been healed of her Parkinson's disease. Right. The miracle would have occurred.
So, I guess let's have some final thoughts from each one of you about this whole notion of miracles. Are there as many today as there seemed to be in the past, and how How does somebody
Jane, I
get
think that what's a big
chosen?
issue is that I think in the past maybe a lot of things were described as miracles that might have had a natural occurrence. That being said, I think there are a natural explanation. That being said, the church has always been concerned that that miracles kind of meet a threshold, that it's something is inexplicable by the best science available. In other words, that you have got to basically exhaust all forms of human reason to sort of understand why this has occurred.
And would that be enough to convince you?
I don't know.
The skeptic in the bunch?
I see them as, I see belief in miracle as a kind of act of hope. I don't know that, I mean, I know that I've never seen one. It would be great if I did.
Maybe having hope would be your miracle.
Well,
Maybe.
And hope has to be founded.
Yeah.
Our hope has to be well founded upon something, right? So
Yeah.
we can't simply say it's an illusion, right? That I believe in miracles because I want to have hope, but I don't believe that miracles can happen, so therefore I don't have hope.
Right.
I mean, that's the challenge,
But
right? That's
to
the
me-
resurrection.
To me, I think sometimes a miracle is really all about the transformation of a person. And when I see somebody being transformed from a place where they were not all that they could have been to a place where they have compassion and where they're faithful and where they're doing things for others.
But that's
that to me is,
processing. But that's processing and growing. I don't know if we would call it a miracle because
Well,
that
ultimately-
generally doesn't happen overnight.
I think
you're
ultimately-
right. It has to be instantaneous. But you have last thoughts from you, and then we are done.
I had a dream once that Jesus touched. I had really bad back pain, and I had a dream once that he touched me in the back and said, "Now your pain is gone." And I woke up, and I've never had back pain since then. And I don't know if that means it was all in my head or not. I choose to believe that it was Jesus, and I just have been too smart to say, "I'll do whatever you want now, Lord," because I know He'll take me at my word.
Thank you all for your thoughts, Grant, Elizabeth, Monsignor. And thank you for joining us. Remember, you don't need a TV to watch the net. We're always online at netny.net. For all of us here, I'm Jane Hanson. We'll see you next time in the arena.